I mean, some people are like really worried about like cell phone towers, thinking they cause like radiation or something poisoning. This is not true.
Yeah, people are worried about 5G, right?
Don't worry about it.
No, not at all.
I mean, no. Like, let me put it this way: like, if I had cell phones, if I had a helmet of cell phones
Right?
strapped around around my head and around my nuts, I would
You're
not worry.
good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I met a dude.
Mr. Chamberlain, you described how the FCC came to what their allowable limits are, and you described the study with the rats. And so you said that essentially these rats were essentially starved, and then they were already trained to be um, they were already trained to be to access food through pressing a lever, and they kept them, I guess, in some sort of container with the lever. And as they sat there, they increased I guess, the radiation in that vessel until the rat was physically unable to press the lever. Is that correct?
You sound as incredulous as I felt the first time I saw it. And that's where I mentioned I had to go through it multiple times before it sunk in. What you just described is perfect. That's what happened. It's kind of like putting them in a microwave oven and continually increasing the power until finally they couldn't function. So yes, that's
So,
exactly what they did.
I have to
so
add, they measured their temperature with a rectal probe.
Right.
okay. So the FCC's the FCC's limit is basically a limit in a rat that once the rat's body was no longer able to function well enough, even while it was starving, to press a lever, that is the legal limit of exposure that the FCC allows. Is
Well,
that
I mean,
correct?
they took that number and then divided it by 50. Where they got the number of 50 from, I have no idea. But they took that exposure where the monkeys got burns on their faces from the radio frequencies, and then they divided it by 50, and they said, well, that's fine for the population in general for 24/7 exposure.
With no scientific study on what that 50% level was over time or anything like that.
What you say is absolutely correct. So no, there was no rationale such as if we divide by 50, we'll get a relative risk of such and such. No, they didn't do that. They came up with the number of 50 and said that'll work. And then it was only a factor of 10 for workers.
Okay. So thank you for that. The other kind of so Representative Adams in the beginning asked what the difference is between 4G and 5G. And I think what I heard was that with the 5G and this contract, utility companies, the telecommunications companies would be able to come in and put cell towers, or they're called small cells,
Right.
on utility poles here in Stanford, which, from what I gathered from what you guys were saying, is different than how it is now, because in a lot of ways we have a tower somewhere all far away from our homes and our businesses or our schools and everything else. But if this were to be allowed, there could be an undisclosed amount of small cells on utility poles. And I think, I live right next to my house. I have a utility pole like right at my house. So is that, I mean, I know that there's a number of differences, but is the amount of exposure due to the fact that these small cells could be virtually anywhere a utility pole is in the city, kind of the main difference here.
I can let other people answer that, but I do know from experience in New York City, where they allowed these 5G small cells to go in, they ended up being right next to people's apartment windows. So yes, that can happen when you allow 5G in. Would anybody else care to comment?
Well, let me just add from our experience. First of all, small cells are not necessarily small. A single 5G antenna system can have more than 100 different signals beaming and beamforming to a phone or a laptop. And keep in mind that in order for 5G to work, you need a 5G router, a 5G computer, a 5G phone. 5G doesn't work on its own without new equipment. That is why I say it's the 5G, 5th generation, is basically a marketing strategy. Ultimately, if 5G were to be universally implemented in all the major cities, then your old equipment would no longer work. And that's a huge, great benefit if you're trying to sell equipment, but it's not a benefit if you're trying to keep essential metals out of your trash, because that is a serious problem of electronic trash that I know you have dealt with otherwise in your county and your city. And eventually it's creating an artificial need, which will be driven by the fact that you won't be able to use old equipment. So the 5G antennas they may call them small because there's a number of different antennas within them, but you are correct that you're taking a signal that used to be on mountaintops and bringing it right smack to your bedroom window.